Nothing says happy marriage like finding your wife's burner phone at 2 in the morning while she's supposedly at another charity gala. I'm Nick Mallory, 41 years old, electrical engineer by day, woodworker by night, and apparently the world's biggest fool by marriage certificate. The phone buzzed against my palm like a guilty conscience. 3 texts from DP, all sent after midnight. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, same place. Sarah, you drive me crazy. Tell Nick you're working late again. I set the phone down on my workbench, hands surprisingly steady. 20 years of marriage, and this is how I find out. Not through lipstick on collars or mysterious receipts, though now that I think about it, there were plenty of those too. No, I discover my wife's affair through a cheap Android hidden in her winter coat pocket, the same coat she claimed to have lost last month. The workshop felt smaller suddenly, my sanctuary shrinking around me like a trap. Sarah's voice drifted down from upstairs, talking on her real phone, probably to her mother, Claire, spinning some story about how exhausting it is to save the world, one fundraiser at a time. The Coastal Maine Children's Foundation paid her well to organize their events, but not well enough to afford the designer clothes that kept appearing in our closet. I heard the floorboards creak overhead, Sarah's footsteps heading toward the bedroom. Our bedroom. The same bed where she'd been claiming headaches and exhaustion for months, while apparently saving all her energy for DP Dave Parmenter. Had to be. The name fit the initials, and it fit the pattern. Sarah had been mentioning him more often lately. Always in professional contexts, of course. Dave thinks we should expand the silent auction. Dave has connections with the yacht club. Dave understands the donor mindset. Dave Parmenter, with his perfect teeth and his lakefront property, and his ability to understand donor mindsets. Dave Parmenter, who sold million-dollar homes to summer people from Boston, while I rewired their electrical panels. Dave Parmenter, who was apparently rewiring my wife. The burner phone buzzed again. Another message. Wear the red dress tomorrow night. You know how it drives me wild. I almost laughed. The red dress. The one Sarah claims she bought for the hospital benefit last month. The same benefit where she told me spouses weren't invited because it was too stuffy for regular people like me. The same benefit that, according to the local paper, had been postponed due to a nor'easter. My fingers moved across the phone's screen, scrolling through weeks of messages. They painted a picture I should have seen coming. Late meetings that ran past midnight. Weekend conferences in Portland that required overnight stays. The gradual cooling at home. The way Sarah looked through me instead of at me, like I was furniture that had outlived its usefulness. Nick's working late tonight. His little projects keep him busy. That message was from 3 days ago. My little projects. 23 years of electrical engineering reduced to little projects. The workshop door creaked. Sarah's voice called down the stairs. Nick, are you still down there? It's past midnight. Just finishing up, I called back, slipping the phone into my pocket. Be up in a minute. Don't stay up too late. I have that early meeting tomorrow. Of course she did. With Dave Parmenter, no doubt. Same place. Whatever that meant. I had a feeling I'd be finding out soon enough. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step a small betrayal of the man I'd been an hour ago. That Nick had been stupid, but he'd been happy. This Nick knew better, and knowing better felt like swallowing broken glass. Sarah was already in bed, her back to me, breathing the steady rhythm of someone pretending to sleep. Her real phone sat on the nightstand, charging. Her fake life required 2 devices, apparently. I lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling. Outside, snow tapped against the windows like accusations. December in Maine. Everything frozen and sharp and unforgiving. Perfect weather for the end of a marriage. The burner phone felt warm in my pajama pocket. Evidence, proof. The smoking gun that would blow up our life together. But what was I supposed to do with it? Confront her in the morning? Hire a lawyer? Break down and cry? Sarah shifted beside me, mumbling something in her sleep. For a moment, she sounded like the woman I'd married, young and hopeful, and full of plans that included me. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who kept burner phones and met men at secret places, and thought my life's work was nothing more than little projects. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my mind kept spinning. 20 years of marriage, and I'd become the punchline to a joke I didn't even know was being told. The faithful husband, the reliable provider, the man who stayed home with his little projects while his wife lived a double life. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I'd figure out what kind of man I was going to be now that I knew what kind of woman I'd married. The phone buzzed one more time against my chest. I didn't need to look to know it was another message from DP. Another piece of evidence that my marriage was over. But maybe, just maybe, it was also the first piece of evidence that my real life was about to begin. Morning came like a hangover, slow, painful, and impossible to ignore. Sarah was already gone, her coffee cup sitting in the sink like a small monument to domestic normalcy. A note on the refrigerator: late meeting tonight, don't wait up. S. Don't wait up. Like I was some kind of dog who might whine at the door. I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in 3 years. My supervisor, Janet, sounded genuinely concerned. You never get sick, Nick. Must be something serious. Food poisoning? I lied. Probably be fine tomorrow. Truth was, I had a different kind of sickness. The kind that comes from discovering your entire life is built on lies. The kind that requires a day of investigation to properly diagnose. First stop, Pete's Auto and Marine, where my oldest friend ran a combination garage and boat repair shop. Pete Kowalski had known me since high school, back when Sarah was just the pretty girl from the rich side of town who somehow ended up dating the electrician's son. You look like hell, Pete said, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. What's eating you? I handed him the burner phone. Pete was the only person I trusted completely, partly because he'd been divorced twice and had no illusions about marriage, and partly because he'd never liked Sarah. Found this last night. Pete scrolled through the messages, his expression darkening. Dave Parmenter, huh? That explains the new BMW in his driveway. Business must be good. You know about this? I know Dave's been spending a lot of time at the Ocean View Inn lately, always with the same woman, according to my cousin who works housekeeping there. Brunette, well-dressed, drives a white Lexus. Sarah's car. Sarah's description. My wife. How long? I asked. Few months, maybe longer. You want my advice? Not really, but give it anyway. Pete leaned against his workbench, the same way I'd leaned against mine the night before. Document everything. Get copies. Protect your assets. And whatever you do, don't let on that you know until you're ready to act. What kind of action are we talking about? That depends on what kind of man you want to be when this is over. I spent the rest of the morning installing tracking software on Sarah's phone. Not the burner, that would tip her off, but her real phone, the one she'd left charging on the kitchen counter while she showered. 3 minutes was all I needed to install the app and hide it in a folder full of other utilities. The software was something I'd learned about through work. We used similar programs to track company vehicles. Completely legal as long as you owned the phone plan, which I did. Sarah might be cheating on me, but she wasn't paying for her own cell service. By noon, I had a complete picture of Sarah's movements over the past month. The Ocean View Inn, Dave's office, his lakefront house, a dozen restaurants I'd never been to. She'd been living an entire parallel life, funded by our joint checking account and my steady paycheck. The tracking showed her current location, Parmenter Real Estate, downtown. Probably planning tonight's rendezvous. The thought made my stomach twist, but it also sparked something else. Anger, maybe. Or determination. I drove to Dave's office, parking across the street where I could watch the entrance. Sarah's Lexus sat in the lot next to Dave's BMW, both cars gleaming in the winter sun like trophies. 20 minutes later, they emerged together. Dave's hand rested on the small of Sarah's back, a gesture so casual and proprietary it made my teeth ache. They stood close, talking quietly, and then Dave leaned down and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, but a real kiss, the kind that said they'd done this before. I took pictures with my phone, hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. Evidence, documentation, the foundation of whatever came next. They separated, Sarah heading toward her car while Dave watched her go, with the satisfied expression of a man who thought he was getting away with something. He had no idea I existed, no idea that Sarah was married to anyone more significant than a paycheck. That was about to change. I followed Sarah at a distance, the tracking app making it easy to stay back without losing her. She drove to the grocery store, then to the bank, then to a boutique I'd never heard of. Normal errands for an abnormal day. The mundane activities of a woman preparing for an evening of adultery. My phone rang as I sat outside the boutique. Sarah's name on the caller ID. "Hi, honey," I answered, voice carefully neutral. "Nick, I'm so sorry, but this meeting is going to run really late tonight, probably past midnight. You know how these donor events can be?" "Of course," I said, watching her through the boutique window as she held up a black dress. "Donor events. Very important. You're not upset, are you? I know we haven't been spending much time together lately. We've been married 20 years, Sarah. I understand that work comes first." A pause. Maybe she heard something in my voice. Or maybe her conscience was finally waking up. "I love you," she said, and for a moment she almost sounded like she meant it. "I love you too," I replied, and realized with surprise that I still did. That was the worst part. Not the betrayal itself, but the fact that it was destroying something real. After she hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching shoppers hurry past with their arms full of Christmas packages. Normal people living normal lives, not sitting in parking lots spying on their cheating wives. But normal was over for me. Normal had ended the moment I found that burner phone. Now I had to decide what came next. Pete was right. It depended on what kind of man I wanted to be when this was over. The kind who rolled over and accepted betrayal? The kind who fought back? Or the kind who fought smart? I started the engine and headed home. I had work to do, and for the first time in months, I had a clear sense of purpose. Sarah thought she was playing games with a fool. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning brought a nor'easter that dumped 8 inches of snow on our little coastal town, the kind of storm that made everyone hunker down and gossip over coffee. Perfect weather for what I had planned. Sarah left early, claiming she needed to get to the office before the roads got too bad. Through the tracking app, I watched her drive straight to Dave's lakefront house. She stayed there for 2 hours before heading to her actual office, probably just long enough to mess up her hair and put on the same clothes she'd worn yesterday. I had coffee with my neighbor, Mrs. Dorsey, a 70-year-old retired librarian who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. She lived alone in the house next door, the same house she'd inherited from her parents 40 years ago, and she had a clear view of our driveway from her kitchen window. "That wife of yours keeps odd hours," she mentioned, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Saw her leaving at 5:30 this morning. Unusual for someone who works normal business hours." "Early meeting," I said. "You know how dedicated she is to her work." Mrs. Dorsey's eyes sharpened. She'd been a librarian for 30 years before retiring, and she had an instinct for information that didn't add up. "Of course, very dedicated. I'm sure that's why she was loading suitcases into her car at 3 a.m. last Tuesday." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. Suitcases? 2 of them. The good leather ones from your honeymoon trip to Europe. I remember because you showed them to me when you got back. So proud of that fancy luggage. Sarah had been planning something. Not just an affair, but an exit strategy. The cash I'd found in her purse, the extra set of house keys, she'd been preparing to run. "Mrs. Dorsey," I said carefully, "if you saw something like that again, would you let me know? I worry about Sarah driving so late at night." "Of course, dear. We neighbors have to look out for each other." I spent the afternoon at Pete's shop, ostensibly helping him rebuild a boat engine, but really planning my next move. Pete listened to my update about the suitcases while threading a new fuel line. "She's getting ready to bolt," he said. "Question is, how much is she planning to take with her?" "What do you mean?" "Bank accounts, retirement funds, the house." "You said she had cash and keys. That sounds like someone who's been planning this for a while." The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it should have. Sarah was smart, organized, and ruthless when it came to getting what she wanted. If she was leaving me for Dave, she'd want to make sure she landed on her feet. "I need to protect myself," I said. "Damn right you do. But carefully. You don't want to tip her off before you're ready." That evening I called my lawyer, not a divorce attorney, just the guy who'd handled our wills and the house purchase. Tom Bradley had been practicing law in our town for 20 years, and he knew how to keep his mouth shut. "Hypothetically," I said, "if someone wanted to protect their assets in case of divorce, what would you recommend?" "Hypothetically," Tom replied, "I'd say document everything. Get copies of all financial records, and don't do anything that could be construed as hiding assets. Maine is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still affect property division if you can prove it. And if this hypothetical person wanted to make sure their spouse couldn't empty their bank accounts, that's trickier. You can't legally prevent access to joint accounts, but you can monitor them. And you can protect any separate property you brought into the marriage. I thought about the house, my house actually, inherited from my grandfather and owned free and clear before Sarah and I got married. She'd pushed hard to add her name to the deed after our wedding, claiming it would be better for tax purposes. I'd refused, one of the few times I'd stood my ground in our relationship. Tom, I need you to review our prenup. Make sure I understand exactly what's protected and what isn't. I'll pull the file tomorrow. But Nick, if this is more than hypothetical, you should consider hiring a specialist. Divorce law isn't really my area. Not yet, I said, but soon. After I hung up, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the projects Sarah had dismissed as hobbies. Hand-carved furniture, custom electrical work, repairs for neighbors who couldn't afford to hire professionals. 23 years of building and fixing and creating reduced to little projects in my wife's mind. But these little projects had taught me patience, precision, and the value of planning ahead, skills I was about to put to very different use. The burner phone sat on my workbench, still receiving messages from Dave. I'd been reading them religiously, building a timeline of their affair. They'd been meeting twice a week for 3 months, always at the same places, always with the same careful planning. Tonight's message was different. Can't wait much longer. When are you going to tell him? Sarah's response came quickly. After Christmas, I promise. Just need to get through the holidays. After Christmas. She was planning to leave me right after the holidays, probably taking half of everything I'd worked for and running off with her real estate Romeo. The thought should have devastated me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I wanted. Claire Morrison, Sarah's mother, the town's unofficial social coordinator and champion gossip. Claire, it's Nick. I was wondering if you'd like to host Christmas dinner this year. I know Sarah's been so busy with work lately, and I thought it might be nice to have a family gathering. Oh, Nick, that's so thoughtful. But you know how much Sarah loves hosting Christmas. It's practically a tradition. Actually, I was hoping we could make it a surprise for her. Invite some of her work friends. Maybe some of the people she's been collaborating with lately. That Dave Parmenter fellow, for instance. She mentions him all the time. A pause. Claire's social radar was finely tuned, and she'd picked up on something. Dave Parmenter? I didn't realize Sarah worked with him directly. Oh yes, very closely. In fact, I was thinking we could make it a celebration of all her hard work this year. Really show our appreciation for everything she's accomplished. That sounds lovely, Nick. Very thoughtful of you. I'll handle all the arrangements. Just bring your appetite and maybe that famous gossip network of yours. I have a feeling it's going to be a Christmas dinner no one will forget. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time in days. Sarah wanted to wait until after Christmas to destroy our marriage? Fine. But she wasn't going to like the Christmas present I had planned for her. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made the whole world feel fragile, like everything might shatter if you breathed on it wrong. Perfect weather for what I had planned. I'd spent the week preparing with the same methodical precision I brought to electrical work. Every wire in the right place, every connection tested and verified. The only difference was that this time, I was wiring a trap instead of a house. The guest list had grown beyond my original plan. Sarah's parents, of course, Richard and Claire, the retired judge and his social butterfly wife. Dave Parmenter, who'd accepted the invitation with obvious confusion, but couldn't refuse without seeming rude. Aaron Walsh, Sarah's best friend and coworker, who I suspected knew more about the affair than she'd ever admitted. And Pete, my only real ally, who'd volunteered to help serve dinner and watch my back. Sarah had been suspicious about the whole thing, questioning why I'd suddenly developed an interest in entertaining. But her mother had been so enthusiastic about the idea that Sarah couldn't object without seeming ungrateful. It's just so wonderful that Nick wants to celebrate your success, Claire had gushed. You've worked so hard this year, and he's so proud of you. If only she knew what I was actually proud of. my wife's remarkable ability to live a double life while making me pay for it. The afternoon was spent in the kitchen, preparing a meal that would have impressed a restaurant critic. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, homemade bread, and a chocolate cake that had taken me 3 attempts to perfect. If this was going to be the last dinner party of my marriage, I wanted it to be memorable. Pete arrived early to help with the final preparations. He found me in the kitchen, tying my apron with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no taking it back." "There's already no taking it back," I replied. "Sarah made that choice months ago. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." The first guests arrived at 6. Richard and Claire dressed like they were attending a state dinner instead of a family meal. Richard shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who'd spent 40 years intimidating people from the bench, while Claire kissed my cheek and complimented the decorations. "Everything looks beautiful, Nick. Sarah is so lucky to have such a thoughtful husband." "I like to think we're both lucky," I said, though I suppose luck runs out eventually. Dave arrived next, looking uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. He was a handsome man, I had to admit, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confident smile that probably sold a lot of houses. The kind of smile that was currently wavering as he tried to figure out why his girlfriend's husband had invited him to Christmas dinner. "Nick, right?" he said, extending his hand. "Thanks for including me. Sarah speaks of you often." "I'm sure she does," I replied, gripping his hand just a little too firmly. "Though I suspect we have different conversations about each other." Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. Good. Erin arrived with a bottle of wine and a nervous energy that suggested she knew this evening wasn't going to go according to plan. She'd been Sarah's friend since college, her confidant and enabler, and I was betting she knew every detail of the affair. Sarah was the last to arrive, which was fitting since this was technically her party. She looked beautiful, she always did, in a green dress that complemented her dark hair and brought out her eyes. For a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her 20 years ago. Then I remembered the burner phone, and the suitcases, and the messages about telling him after Christmas. "Everyone's here," she said, surveying the assembled guests with confusion. "This is quite a crowd for Christmas Eve." "I wanted to celebrate," I said. "You've accomplished so much this year. New partnerships, new relationships, new opportunities. I thought your friends and collaborators should share in recognizing your achievements." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. She was smart enough to know when something was off, but not smart enough to figure out exactly what. Dinner conversation was strained, full of the kind of polite small talk that people make when they're not sure why they're all in the same room. Dave kept glancing at Sarah, trying to communicate without words. Richard pontificated about local politics. Claire gossiped about neighbors. Erin drank wine faster than she should have. I played the perfect host, refilling glasses and steering conversation, waiting for the right moment. It came during dessert, when Claire raised her wine glass for a toast. "To Sarah," she said, "for all her hard work and dedication, and to Nick, for being such a supportive husband." "Actually," I said, standing up with my own glass, "I'd like to add something to that toast." The table fell quiet. Sarah looked at me with growing alarm. "To partnerships," I continued, "both professional and personal. To the relationships that sustain us and the collaborations that define us. And to honesty, the foundation of every successful partnership." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table next to the chocolate cake. "Sarah, you've been so busy with your new partnership that I thought everyone should know about it. Especially Dave, since he's been such an integral part of your recent success." Dave's face went white. Sarah's went red. "Nick," she said, her voice tight with warning. "What are you doing?" "I'm celebrating transparency," I replied, opening the envelope. "Starting with these." I spread the photographs across the table like playing cards. Sarah and Dave at the Ocean View Inn. Sarah and Dave at his lakefront house. Sarah and Dave kissing in the parking lot of his office. The silence was deafening. Richard was the first to speak, his judge's voice cutting through the tension like a gavel. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning," I said, "is that your daughter has been having an affair for 3 months while planning to leave me after Christmas. The meaning is that she's been using our joint accounts to fund her relationship while lying to everyone in this room. Sarah stood up so quickly, her chair fell over. You bastard! You've been spying on me. I've been protecting myself, I corrected, which, as it turns out, was necessary. Dave finally found his voice. Look, Nick, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I interrupted, was thinking I was stupid enough not to notice. But please, don't let me stop you from explaining to everyone how this is all perfectly innocent. Erin was crying into her wine glass. Claire looked like she'd been slapped. Richard was studying the photographs with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen plenty of evidence in his courtroom career. These are quite clear, he said finally. Sarah, is this true? Sarah looked around the table, seeing her carefully constructed life crumbling in real time. When she spoke, her voice was different, harder, more honest than I'd heard it in years. Yes, she said, it's true. I've been seeing Dave, and yes, I was planning to leave Nick after Christmas. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just getting started. Well, I said, sitting back down and cutting myself another piece of cake, at least now we're all on the same page. That's when Dave made his mistake. Maybe it was panic, maybe it was stupidity, but he decided this was the moment to take a swing at me. He lunged across the table, knocking over wine glasses and scattering photographs. But 23 years of physical labor had kept me in better shape than his gym membership had kept him, and I saw it coming. I stepped aside, letting momentum carry him past me and straight into the Christmas tree. The 7-foot Douglas fir went down in a crash of breaking ornaments and tangled lights, taking Dave with it. Pete was on his feet instantly, hauling Dave up by his collar while I brushed pine needles off my shirt. I think, I said calmly, it's time for some of our guests to leave. But Erin, drunk and emotional, wasn't finished. You want to know the truth? She shouted, pointing at me with a shaking finger. Sarah was going to frame you for domestic abuse. She and Dave had it all planned out. Fake bruises, police reports, restraining orders. They were going to take everything you have. The room went dead silent. Sarah's face crumpled. Erin, shut up. No. Erin was crying and laughing at the same time. He deserves to know what you really are, what you were really planning. I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and saw a stranger. Not just an adulterer, but someone who'd been willing to destroy me completely to get what she wanted. Get out, I said quietly. All of you except Pete, get out of my house. They left in a flurry of coats and accusations. Sarah and Dave slinking away like the thieves they were. Richard and Claire following in stunned silence. Only Erin lingered, sobbing apologies that were 20 years too late. When the door finally closed, Pete and I stood in the wreckage of my dining room, surrounded by broken ornaments and the remains of what had once been my marriage. Well, Pete said, that went better than expected. I laughed, surprising myself. How do you figure? Nobody got arrested and you found out about the frame-up before they could use it. Plus, you've got witnesses now. Half the town will know the truth by morning. He was right. In a place like this, secrets didn't stay secret for long. By New Year's, everyone would know exactly what Sarah and Dave had been planning. What now? Pete asked. I looked around at the mess, then at the photographs still scattered on the table. Evidence of betrayal, but also evidence of my own survival. Now, I said, I finish what they started. The week between Christmas and New Year's was traditionally quiet in our town, a time when people recovered from holiday excess and prepared for the long slog through winter. This year, it was anything but quiet. News of the Christmas dinner catastrophe spread through the community like spilled wine through a white tablecloth. Mrs. Dorsey, who'd heard every shouted word through our shared wall, had called 3 friends before the last guest left my driveway. By morning, the story had reached every coffee shop, beauty salon, and grocery store checkout line in town. Sarah had moved out Christmas night, taking only the clothes she could fit in her car. She'd tried to access our joint accounts the next morning, only to discover I'd moved half the funds to a separate account. Perfectly legal, since they were marital assets, and exactly what Tom Bradley had advised. You can't do this, she'd screamed over the phone. That's my money too. You're absolutely right, I'd replied. Your half is in the checking account. My half is somewhere safe until our lawyers figure out the details. Dave, meanwhile, had bigger problems than a bruised ego. His wife, a detail he'd somehow forgotten to mention to Sarah, had received an anonymous package containing copies of all the photographs from Christmas dinner. She'd filed for divorce by December 27th and was demanding half of everything, including the lakefront house where he'd been entertaining my wife. But I wasn't finished, not even close. The first week of January, I made a call to the Coastal Maine Children's Foundation, specifically to the board of directors. I identified myself as a concerned donor and mentioned that I'd heard rumors about inappropriate workplace relationships involving staff members. I'm sure it's nothing, I said, but given that the foundation works with children, I thought you should be aware. The last thing anyone wants is a scandal. The investigation was swift and thorough. By Friday, Sarah was on administrative leave pending a full review of her conduct. The foundation took a dim view of executives who used company resources for personal relationships, especially when those relationships involve vendors like Dave's real estate company. Meanwhile, I'd been busy with projects of my own. Pete and I spent a pleasant Tuesday evening at Dave's lakefront house while he was in Portland meeting with his divorce lawyer. We didn't break in. The sliding door was unlocked, practically an invitation. We didn't steal anything or cause any permanent damage. We simply rearranged his life in ways that would take him weeks to discover. Salt in the sugar bowl, shrimp shells hidden in the curtain rods, his expensive suits rearranged so that all the left sleeves were shortened by 2 inches. And in his home office, we found something interesting, a safe hidden behind a painting of a lighthouse. Pete's criminal youth came in handy. The safe wasn't as secure as Dave probably thought, and inside we found documents that painted a very different picture of his relationship with Sarah. Love letters, yes, but also financial records showing he'd been embezzling money from his own real estate deals, and a detailed plan for divorcing his wife and marrying Sarah, complete with a timeline for liquidating assets and disappearing to Florida. Son of a bitch was planning to rob everyone, Pete muttered, photographing the documents with his phone. His wife, his clients, and your wife too, once he got what he wanted from her. I made copies of everything and returned the originals to the safe. Evidence like this was too valuable to steal. It was better to let Dave think it was secure while I decided how to use it. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Dave's wife, Linda, called me 3 days later. She'd gotten my number from the phone book and wanted to meet. We sat in Pete's bar on a Thursday afternoon, the place empty except for one old-timer, nursing a beer and watching a basketball game on the mounted TV. Linda Parmenter was nothing like I'd expected. Not the trophy wife I'd imagined, but a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the kind of practical clothes that suggested she had more important things to worry about than fashion. I wanted to thank you, she said, stirring her coffee with a plastic spoon, for letting me know what Dave was really doing. I'm sorry you had to find out that way. I'm not. I suspected something was wrong, but I could never prove it. The photographs you sent gave me the evidence I needed. We talked for an hour, comparing notes about our respective spouses' deceptions. Linda had been married to Dave for 15 years and had watched him become increasingly secretive and financially reckless. He thinks I don't understand his business, she said. But I've been doing his books for 10 years. I know exactly how much money should be in our accounts, and I know it's not there. Before she left, Linda handed me a slip of paper with a combination written on it. Dave's safe, she explained. I installed it 5 years ago as a surprise for his birthday. He never changed the combination. It's still our anniversary date. Thought you might find that information useful. Why are you helping me? Because Dave destroyed both our marriages, and he's going to try to destroy both of us in the divorce proceedings. But he can't destroy what he doesn't know we know. That evening, I called Tom Bradley and arranged to meet him first thing Monday morning. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. Sarah, meanwhile, had been staying at a motel on the outskirts of town. Her grand exit strategy derailed by the loss of her job and Dave's sudden unavailability. She'd tried calling me several times, alternating between tearful apologies and angry demands, but I'd stopped answering. The final call came on Sunday night, just as I was finishing dinner. Nick, please, we need to talk. I don't think we do. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. Sarah, You were planning to frame me for domestic violence. You were going to steal my house and destroy my reputation to cover up your affair. That's not a mistake.
That's attempted murder of everything I am.
Silence on the other end of the line. I never would have gone through with it, she said finally. I don't believe you. And more importantly, I don't care. You made your choice when you started sleeping with Dave. You made your choice when you started planning your exit strategy. Now you get to live with the consequences. You're really going to throw away 20 years of marriage? I'm not throwing away anything, I said. You already did that. I hung up and turned off the phone. Tomorrow, I was going to end this once and for all. But first, I had one more surprise to arrange. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of January day that made everything look sharp and unforgiving. Perfect weather for endings. I met Tom Bradley at his office at 8 a.m., carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. Photographs, financial records, copies of the documents from Dave's safe, and a detailed timeline of Sarah's affair and planned deception. Jesus, Nick, Tom said, spreading the papers across his conference table. This is enough to bury both of them. That's the idea. What are my options? Tom studied the documents for 20 minutes, making notes and occasionally whistling under his breath. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and gave me the kind of smile lawyers reserve for cases they know they can't lose. Adultery, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement. And that's just what I can prove from these documents. Your wife and her boyfriend have handed you the nuclear option. I don't want nuclear, I said. I want surgical. I want them to understand exactly what they've lost and why they lost it, but I don't want to go to prison for revenge. Smart man. Here's what I recommend. By noon, I had a plan that was both elegant and devastating. By 2 p.m., I'd made the necessary phone calls. By 5 p.m., the trap was set. The meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. at Pete's Bar, neutral ground where everyone could speak freely without worrying about neighbors overhearing. I'd invited Sarah, Dave, Linda Parmenter, and Richard Morrison, Sarah's father, whose legal expertise I wanted as a witness to what was about to happen. They arrived separately, each looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Sarah appeared fragile and desperate, her usual polish replaced by the kind of exhaustion that comes from having your life implode. Dave looked angry and cornered, the confident salesman replaced by a man who'd finally run out of charm. Linda was calm and determined, carrying a briefcase that probably contained enough evidence to end Dave's career. Richard looked like a judge preparing to hear a case he didn't want to preside over. Pete had closed the bar to regular customers, giving us privacy for what was essentially going to be a trial. He served coffee and beer with the solemnity of a bailiff, then took a seat at the bar where he could watch the proceedings. I stood at the head of the table, looking at the assembled group like a prosecutor addressing a jury. We're here, I began, to settle some outstanding business. Sarah, you wanted to leave me after Christmas and take half of everything I've worked for. Dave, you wanted to help her do it, while protecting your own assets and reputation. Unfortunately for both of you, your plan had some flaws. I opened my briefcase and began laying out documents, like a dealer shuffling cards. First, the adultery. We have photographs, hotel receipts, and enough witness testimony to establish a clear pattern of infidelity. In Maine, that affects property division, especially when marital assets were used to fund the affair. Sarah's face was pale, but she found her voice. You can't prove I used our money for... Actually, I can. I slid a bank statement across the table. Joint credit card, charges at the Ocean View Inn, restaurants, boutiques, all during times when you claim to be working late or attending conferences that, according to your employer, you never attended. Dave leaned forward, his salesman instincts kicking in. Look, Nick, I understand you're angry, but Sarah and I are in love. These things happen. We can work out a fair settlement. Fair? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. Dave, let me tell you about fair. I pulled out the copies of the documents from his safe, watching his face drain of color as he recognized them. Fair would have been you telling Sarah that you're already married. Fair would have been mentioning that you've been embezzling money from your real estate deals to fund your lifestyle. Fair would have been warning her that you were planning to disappear to Florida with whatever money you could steal from everyone stupid enough to trust you. The silence in the room was absolute. Linda spoke for the first time since arriving. He was going to leave me with nothing. 26 years of marriage, and he was going to disappear with money he'd stolen from his own clients. Richard's judicial training took over. These are serious accusations. Do you have proof? I handed him copies of Dave's financial records and the Florida escape plan. He read them with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 40 years evaluating evidence. This appears to document systematic embezzlement and fraud, he said finally. Dave, did you create these documents? Dave looked around the table like a trapped animal. Those were just ideas, contingency plans. You never actually what? Linda interrupted. Stole money? Planned to abandon your wife? Lied to your girlfriend about being married? Sarah was staring at Dave like she was seeing him for the first time. You're married? You told me you were divorced. Separated, Dave said weakly. We were separated. We were never separated, Linda said coldly. We were married, living in the same house, sharing the same bed until 3 weeks ago when I found out about you. I watched Sarah's face crumble as she realized she'd thrown away her marriage for a man who'd been lying to her from the beginning. It was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Sarah, you're going to sign divorce papers that give you exactly what you deserve. Nothing. The house is mine, inherited before our marriage. The retirement accounts are mostly mine, earned through my work. You'll get alimony for 2 years, enough to get back on your feet, but nothing more. You can't. I can, and I will. The alternative is that I turn all of this evidence over to the district attorney and let them sort out the criminal charges. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted extortion, because yes, Sarah, your plan to frame me for domestic violence constitutes extortion. Richard nodded grimly. He's right. The evidence is overwhelming. I turned to Dave. As for you, you're going to make full restitution to everyone you've stolen from, starting with your wife. You're going to surrender your real estate license and leave town. The alternative is prison. Dave's last bit of fight drained out of him. And if I agree, then Linda doesn't press charges, and I don't send copies of these documents to every real estate board and law enforcement agency in New England. Linda smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Oh, I'm pressing charges anyway, but I'll recommend leniency if you make full restitution. The meeting lasted another hour, hammering out details and signing preliminary agreements. Sarah cried, Dave raged, and Richard looked like he was watching his daughter's life disintegrate in real time. When it was over, they left in the same order they'd arrived, separately, quietly, with the weight of consequences settling on their shoulders like snow. Pete locked the door behind the last of them and poured 2 beers, sliding one across the bar to me. How do you feel? He asked. I considered the question, taking a long drink and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the lies, the months of deception that had nearly destroyed me. Free, I said finally. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. Through the window, I could see Sarah's car pulling out of the parking lot. Dave's BMW following a few minutes later. They were leaving town together, but not in the way they'd planned. They were leaving as exposed frauds, their reputations in ruins, their futures uncertain. I thought about the house I'd inherited from my grandfather, the workshop where I'd built furniture and fixed problems and created things that would last. Tomorrow, I'd go back to that workshop, but I'd be going back as a different man. Not the fool who'd been played for 20 years, but the man who'd refused to be destroyed by betrayal. Not the victim of someone else's greed and selfishness, but the architect of his own justice. Sarah had wanted to wait until after Christmas to end our marriage. She'd gotten her wish, in a way. Our marriage was definitely over. But I was the one who'd chosen how it ended. Pete raised his beer in a toast. To new beginnings. To old endings, I corrected, and we drank to the death of everything I thought I wanted and the birth of everything I actually needed. Outside, the snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of cars and people and lies, leaving the world clean and white and ready for whatever came next.